Okay, we started.
Okay.
So we both sat there and we watched the State of the Union address, which was very interesting to say the least.
Absolutely. I mean, this is not politics as usual in the United States, that's for sure. Um, we're living in strange times.
That I love the I care about people. I care about people, but but then turns around and it puts forward some of the most just inhuman policies possible. It's just simply ridiculous.
Indeed. I mean, one thing that struck me was, one of the people he brought with him was someone who had been convicted of something related to drugs and had received a life sentence, and he had pardoned them. And it struck me. I mean, first of all, it shows how, the Republican Party has changed a lot on the drug issue, namely because the opioid epidemic has hit so many people in Rust Belt states. So many white working class people have been hit by the drug epidemic that no more can, drugs be simply portrayed as something that affect people of color, and on top of that, I mean, could you imagine what the response would have been if a Democrat had brought someone convicted of drugs that they had pardoned and let out of jail to the State of the Union? It would be ridiculous. I mean, the response would be there'd be mass outrage. But the Republicans have really shifted. I mean, for a long time they were the party of get tough on crime, lock them up for longer. I mean, this is a real shift, and it shows that in the Rust Belt states and in the South and a lot of places, among the rural white working class, the opioid epidemic has changed the way people relate to the drug issue. I mean, it has just changed the way they see it.
Oh, that's definitely the case. It's amazing to see Republicans give one iota of a damn about poor people suffering from the opioid crisis, and I think this truly reflective of how serious it is. It's normal that they normally, you've got this thing and they don't really care, what can they monetize off it, etc. But I think this is affecting the labor pool. I think that it's making it more difficult to find workers for certain jobs, etc. It's negatively affecting the economy, and that's why they've suddenly decided that they want to do something about it. I mean, let's face it, they don't do anything about a problem until it either affects them directly or it becomes, a problem that they really have to deal with once it reaches a certain threshold in the amount of difficulty it's causing.
Oh, indeed. And I would also add that, Trump's base very much voted for him because they thought he was going to end the wars. And Trump hasn't done that. In fact, he bombed Syria, which Obama would never do. Obama never directly attacked the Syrian Arab Republic, but but Trump, really tried to play up the idea that he's some kind of isolationist. Um, in his speech tonight. I mean, even despite everything, even despite the fact there was this talk of pulling out of Syria, pulling U.S. troops out of Syria, that's not even going to happen now, I guess. And the other thing was he talked about negotiating with the Taliban and said that he believed the Taliban wanted peace. It was quite an interesting speech, if you ever heard it. And there were some things you almost wondered, like who he was trying to appeal to. Why was he trying to say things the way he did? Now, the part that probably struck you and me both the hardest was that that we've all heard Trump's rant against socialism. It always starts with Venezuela, and then it turns into a rant against the entire concept of socialism. But tonight he took it in a completely different direction and began ranting against Americans who advocate socialism. Did you see that?
Yeah, that was impossible to miss. I don't think anybody missed that.
And that was bizarro. I mean, and it's funny because it's like, the socialist movement in the U.S., I mean, you've got, people like Bernie Sanders types advocating democratic socialism, but as far as people that want to overturn capitalist property relations, it's a very small group of people. And I don't think he was talking about people who want guaranteed health care. He said the USA will never be a socialist nation. I mean, he was referring to people who want to overturn the whole system. And it kind of reminds you of that, the opening lines of the Communist Manifesto, where Karl Marx is talking about, a specter is haunting Europe, because it's like a specter is haunting the United States. It's like, There isn't some big force calling for the overturning of capitalism and the banks, factories, and industries to be run by the people, and society to operate according to a plan and not profits. And there's not a big call for that, but there seems to be a recognition among the power structure of how much of a threat that really is. I think Karl Marx is grinning in his grave somewhere.
His defaced grave.
Indeed, indeed. And again, isn't it interesting that Karl Marx's grave was just recently defaced? You would think that would have happened during the Cold War. That would have happened, Yeah, I mean, it shows you that, the specter of Marxism is still hanging over the heads of the ruling class, like you wouldn't believe. The thing that I think should have been most shocking to people was the way the Democrats seemed to really just applaud on Venezuela. They were totally with him in recognizing this obscure Juan Guaido figure, and they were with him. It seemed like Trump was really pushing, unity. Let's get past, the fighting and all of that. And, he was pushing his wall, and he was definitely pushing his border wall. And some of his rhetoric around that was certainly full of kind of, logical fallacies. For example, it's well documented most of the drugs that come to the United States come through legal ports of entry. These migrants that are crossing the desert, and, they find bodies along the border every day of people trying to get across. Those people, aren't carrying huge cartloads of, cocaine with them as they try to cross and die of dehydration in the desert. Right, that most drugs that are smuggled into the U.S. are smuggled in through legal ports of entry. So building a big, huge wall is not going to stop the flow of drugs, into the United States, right? If anything, you want to stop drugs from coming in, you need to, clamp down on the checkpoints and different things. So that just doesn't add up. But regardless, he was really pushing his wall. And then there were some moments of the speech you had to wonder what exactly he was getting at. He was talking. There was a whole thing against anti-Semitism. And then from there, he started talking about the Second World War as a glorious moment in U.S. history. And the USA was on the right side of that war for sure, defeating the Nazis, aligned with the Soviet Union. But of course, just like all standard U.S. rhetoric around the Second World War, the fact that the Soviet Union liberated the majority of the concentration camps was completely left out. And actually, he has such hatred for socialists. Well, if it weren't for a socialist nation, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, it's very unlikely that war would have ended the way it did. The Soviet Union played such a pivotal role in that war. And it's funny, he had that rant against, socialists and, America's a free nation. But then later at the end of the speech, he's going on and he's saying, one nation under God. He's quoting the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance. Well, the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance was written by a socialist, Francis Bellamy. Was a socialist Baptist minister who actually wrote the U.S. Pledge of Allegiance. So, is he going to be against that, right? If socialism is so un-American, why would he invoke the Pledge of Allegiance written by one of these dirty, rotten socialists he hates so much? The whole speech just kind of reeked of ignorance, and that you get the idea that Trump is appealing to an older demographic. It reminds you of, when Reagan came into office and first said, let's make America great again, which now Trump has kind of picked up as his own slogan, adjusted it just to make America great again. When Reagan came in, Reagan very much made an appeal to people who could remember the 1950s. And he said, look, things are going bad. The economy went down in the 70s. There were the 60s. People are confused. People aren't proud of their country. Remember how great the 50s were. And it's almost like Trump is doing that, except it's with the 80s, right? He's saying to all these people, do you remember how good it used to be in the 80s?
No, it wasn't.
It's weird. It's very, very weird. You know what I mean? And the 80s was certainly, the economy of the USA was certainly more prosperous in the 80s, but it was hardly a golden age. If the 1980s is your golden age you're aspiring to, we're really in a bad spot in the United States. I'll tell you that much. It kind of shows an element of just, just desperate clinging to a kind of nostalgia. Make America great again. He's saying, things used to be good, and then they all went to hell. Everything fell apart. But stick with me, and I can, bring things back to the way they used to be.
I think that's very indicative of conservative politics in general. There's no vision for the future. It's just wanting to go back to something else that's idealized. There's no concept of where everyone is going for the future. There's no idea of how to advance. There's only ideas of going back. I think that hence the term conservative, to conserve the way things are. But I think that's a very much part of the rhetoric of this group of people, that they don't see the future as something to build, something to improve upon. They only see the past as something to be idealized.
Of course, and that, I mean that is standard conservative rhetoric. But what strikes you is just how extreme it is with this administration and how almost desperate it is. Like Venezuela, right? Like he's just beating his chest like crazy against Venezuela because they're Marxists, they're socialists, and they remind Cold War, right? I mean, it's like he's trying to remind people of the Cold War very, very desperately. I mean, it reminds you also, there was an article that Mike Pompeo wrote where he was trying to lay out the Trump doctrine. It was in the Foreign Affairs, the publication of the Council on Foreign Relations. And again, he's comparing Iran to the Soviet Union, saying that somehow, Trump is the new Reagan, taking on the new Soviet Union, Iran. And it's just very, very desperate pandering. It's trying to get people to remember a very different time. And the Trump administration is full of these neocon, what they called Sovietologists, the people that would go to the universities in the USA in like the 80s that would study, the Soviet studies and learn to speak Russian, and they were just, everything they learned was all about how are we going to beat the Soviets, how are we going to beat the Soviets. And the neocon school of thought is largely those people who studied Sovietology at American universities in the early 80s, late 70s. And now these people are running U.S. foreign policy. And it seems like in many ways Trump came in as kind of, oppositional to those folks. And, he had Michael Flynn and he had other people who had been, critical of the policies those people had put forward, critical of regime change and interventionism and favored kind of an isolationist line. But now, I mean, you see him now surrounded by neocons. So it's a bit of a mess. But even in this speech, you heard him saying, that great nations don't have endless wars. I mean, he's really, but that's what the population wants. And that's what struck me so much about this speech is, there are a lot of things you heard Trump say tonight that Bernie Sanders could very well have said. There's this underlying feeling in the USA that the police state is out of control. There are way too many people in prison. We're way too involved in wars around the world. We need to focus on raising a better standard of living here at home. That's just kind of standard feeling. That's the grievance that is kind of universal across the board, right? Everyone is frustrated about the fact that the U.S. government is meddling in countries all around the world, that our standard of living is dropping, and that people locked up everywhere, and that there seems to be more and more of a police state. That's standard. Left, right, center, everyone feels that way. And Trump basically used the speech tonight to try and say that he's addressing those issues. Right? Look, here's a woman I let out of jail. Look, people are getting off of food stamps. Look, I'm negotiating with the Taliban. He was trying to tell everybody that he's ending the wars, which he's not doing. Trying to tell everyone that he's getting rid of the police state, which he's certainly not doing. Trying to tell everyone that he's making the standard of living rise, which there has been a somewhat uptick in the economy, but I mean it's a low wage economy for millennials, right? I mean people are working, but they're making very low wages. Things are not looking up. We're not seeing just a boom. He said the USA was in the middle of an economic miracle. And I just thought, my goodness,
Nope.
I mean, what planet is he living on if he thinks this is an economic miracle? We've got crumbling infrastructure. We've got low wages. Come on, it's one thing to say that unemployment is low. It's one thing to say that the stock market is doing well. There's been an uptick, but it's to say economic miracle. Does he know what an economic miracle is? It's just kind of shocking. But Trump is known for that, using kind of over the top adjectives and rhetoric to describe his own work. Like when he was talking about Iran, for example, he's like, they're doing bad things or something. It's like whenever he starts using those adjectives that are very, very high, you almost get a feeling that you can't really, he's bluffing on some level,
Yeah, for the unemployment thing, yeah, the unemployment is at a rate. Then he could talk about the real rate. But then there's the other issue of the fact that, involuntary part-time has gone up 42%. So, yeah, I guess technically they're employed if you're underemployed and you're in a part-time job against your will because the full-time job isn't there. And I thought it was a very interesting. In order to prevent Iran from having nuclear weapons, we withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal. Like, how did that make sense in any way, shape, or form?
Well, the entire conversation around the Iran nuclear deal was just a mess while it was going on, and even now, because you have to remember that the Democrats and Obama were saying they wanted Iran to not get nuclear weapons, right? And that's why they were doing the nuclear deal. And the Republicans are saying, no, if you do this nuclear deal, they will get nuclear weapons. And here's the thing. Iran never has tried to pursue nuclear weapons at any point, right? They've had a peaceful nuclear energy program in which every site was inspected by the International Atomic Energy Agency, right? Iran is a signer of the Nuclear
14
Non-Proliferation
times.
Treaty. Yeah, so what happened was they had a deal. They made a deal with the United States, and the deal was to shut down the overwhelming majority of their peaceful nuclear energy program, and that was it. And it's like, so then they shut down a whole bunch of their peaceful nuclear energy power plants, and then Obama was like, "See, we saved the world. They haven't gotten the bomb." And then the Republicans are like, "Oh, you've paved the way for them to get the bomb," and it's like, I mean, at no point was Iran taking any moves toward getting a bomb. So the whole thing was just, it was just a farce. And it's like, I mean, it's like a fiction. So it's like, somehow Iran was going to get nuclear weapons with their peaceful nuclear energy plan. Well, the IAEA, watching their every move, watching everything that goes in and out of every nuclear site, I really doubt that. I mean, but then now that they're not in the deal, what? So now they're going to, I mean, they can, in theory, start up their nuclear energy program again. Oh, so again, they're still signers of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The IAEA is monitoring all these sites. So, the whole conversation is just a fiction. It's just a pure fiction. And it's a fiction of warmongers, really. I mean, and it's kind of sad because at the end of the day, it was just a clash between two different strategies. Obama's strategy in dealing with countries that were critical of the United States was that he got friendly with them, he made deals with them, he opened things up, and he snuck U.S. people in there and snuck U.S. influence in there and tried to foment color revolutions. That's what he did in Libya. That's what he tried to do in Cuba, right? He got friendly, he restored relations, he opened up trade with them, and then he snuck American influence and American people in there and tried, and in Libya it was successful to bring down Gaddafi, and tried in Cuba, right? He restored diplomatic relations, he opened up trade, and he tried. The CIA was caught trying to set up a Twitter so they could pull off a color revolution. And the Cubans, they prevented it from happening. But that's the Obama strategy. It's CIA and soft power, whereas Trump and the Republicans tend to be more in with the Pentagon and the war hawks, and they favor direct military attack. It's a difference of strategy. And at one point, when Trump was talking about pulling out of the INF treaty, do you remember that part?
Yeah.
Yeah, at that point, I mean, it was just really blatant. He's pandering to military contractors when he's like, "Oh, we pulled out of the INF treaty, and America will spend however much we need to spend," and they're all cheering. And it's like, that's just a handout to the military corporations, right? They're excited. They're going to be, getting paid lots of money to make more and more nukes. I mean, meanwhile, if you want to have a safer world, you should really be signing more nuclear agreements, not ripping up ones that already exist. And the crazy thing is, the INF treaty, it's only for short-range nuclear missiles. So the USA cannot hit Russia with a short-range nuclear missile. Russia cannot hit the USA with a short-range nuclear missile. It's Europe that gets affected by this, right? They're the ones that get affected, right? If all of a sudden short-range nuclear missiles are back in business, all the NATO countries are going to have to be, purchasing short-range. It throws everything out of whack. The USA and Russia are not directly affected. It's the countries in between that are affected by this.
It's also very tiresome.
Yeah, but I mean, it was, there was a lot of emotionalism, and that's what's made, Trump's State of the Unions have been better, I think, than previous presidents, because they're much more emotional and they're much more, it's more showmanship, it's more exciting, it's much more of a show, but at the same time, especially the socialism thing tonight, that confused me. That really confused me because it's, again, does he think Ocasio-Cortez is going to take over the country? Is that what he's afraid of? Does he think Bernie Sanders is gonna seize control and nationalize the means of production? I really doubt there's any chance of that happening in the near future, and it shows kind of a real fear. It seems like, the fact that we've seen so many, prominent political figures get up and talk about the danger of a revival of Marxism. Marxism's on its way back. It's only a matter of time before that ideology and that worldview returns. And I think they know that, even though it hasn't really materialized yet.
Yeah, I No, that's not coming anytime soon, but I'm sure Trump thinks it does. I mean, keep in mind what these guys consider to be socialism. Can I see a doctor? That's pretty much socialism to them in general. You know, what I was thinking about.
Well,
Oh, I was thinking about
yeah.
what Rand Paul said about socialized medicine. That it means the government can come into your home in the middle of the night and force you to give health care to someone.
Right, and he said that you couldn't have Bernie Sanders because remember, look at what happened with Pol Pot, and it's like I can't think of two people more ideologically far apart than Bernie Sanders and Pol Pot, you know. But it's all, you know, I mean, it's absurd. But at the same time, you know, you almost wonder. I mean, it's almost like they're trying to set up. You know, you've seen that Ocasio-Cortez has done a huge amount of social media work, and Trump has done a huge amount of social media work. And you almost wonder if this is the new thing, right? That we're going to have, you know, Ocasio-Cortez pushing the Green New Deal, and Trump, bashing socialism, and the two of them are going to wage a war on social media, and it's going to be just kind of a huge distraction from what's really going on. You almost wonder about that. But I mean, the speech was very, very odd. I'll say that much. It was a very, very odd speech. It was different than other State of the Unions that I've seen for sure. I mean, the bringing guests, that's pretty standard. There were other things, but I mean, when he proclaimed there to be an economic miracle in the United States right now, that just hits you the level of delusion. I mean, that's just overwhelming. I mean, I was beyond it. I was impressed with the tweets of Tulsi Gabbard. I will say. She really, on foreign policy points, she talked about how immigration to the United States is largely due to regime change policies in Latin America. She talked about how the trade, the tariffs and stuff such on China are actually making the economy worse. It was quite powerful. I was kind of impressed with how bold Tulsi Gabbard's tweets on foreign policy were. So that was quite interesting to watch on social media. But there you go. And on some issues, I will say that, I mean, in a way, Trump, the fact that he said, that great countries don't wage endless wars and tried to appeal to some isolationist sentiments. Obama didn't say anything like that. With the Obama and then the previous Bush administration, it was just an endless appeal to this humanitarian intervention. We go around the world rescuing people and saving people. And the USA is just this global cowboy that rides in and rescues people that are being oppressed by evildoers. I mean, it seems like that dead horse has just been beaten so much in the minds of the U.S. public that they're sick of it. And the Republicans that used to be more for it than the Democrats were are sick of hearing it. And now they've got a president in the office that's trying to reassure everybody he's trying to end the wars. Meanwhile, he's, escalating things. So there you go.
Yeah, I mean, it is pretty nonsense. I think that the most telling part about this is that they don't go to war just because they want to. They go to war because of monopoly capital and whatnot. If you're going to maintain the empire, you do have to go to war, and you know what's going to happen if the empire comes apart. There's going to be an economic catastrophe. So it's not even like it's something they can simply choose to do. It's something that if you want this system, you're going to have to do it. You're either going to get this or go get a new system.
Yeah, well, that means to enforce the system. I mean, it's, the regimes and governments that are targeted are governments that have broken out of the control of Wall Street and London. I mean, that's, and especially now with Russia and China rising and with Russia and China aligning with a lot of these independent governments around the world, it's increasingly becoming, like you don't have to do business with them. It used to be if they cut you off, you just starved, right? They were the global economy. Well, it's not the case anymore with One Belt, One Road initiative, with the Eurasian Economic Union, with BRICS. I mean, there's so many alternatives, and with the Bolivarian, the ALBA Bank, and the Bolivarian alternative for Latin America. The global South is developing on its own, and there is trade between countries that were formerly, impoverished countries. And we're at the point where there is an alternative. People don't have to trade simply with the United States. They don't.
Are you there?
It's a new playing field, and the United States is essentially getting pushed out of the global economy. I mean, there is an alternative. They don't have the dominance they once had, and that scares them.
Yeah. Well, I'm sorry, but the Skype cut out for a while there, and we missed a small part of that.
No, I was just saying that the USA is being pushed out of the global economy in a lot of ways. People don't have to trade with them. They're not people. People have alternatives to trade with the rising alternatives that exist in the world, and that's what threatens them the most. Is that it used to be, you remember the 1990s where Cuba and North Korea were basically, North Korea had starvation. Cuba really suffered. They didn't get to the point of starvation, but they really suffered because the Soviet Union fell and there was nobody for them to trade with, and they were just kind of isolated. Both.
Yeah, I think that growing alternative is something something that's tremendously important for the general independence movement. But I'm sorry, we've lost the connection again. You there?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm here, but we're cutting out, and I probably should go here. But it was quite an interesting speech to watch because at this point there seem to be big divisions between the American ruling class. There are different factions that want different things, and in a way, as much as Trump likes to talk tough, and he's been tough, and there's is the government shut down and might shut down again in a few weeks. This speech almost was somewhat defensive. I mean, there was calls for unity. And it was almost like you almost sensed an element of fear from the administration that perhaps the forces that oppose them within the American ruling class are getting the upper hand. He didn't you didn't see him directly attacking Nancy Pelosi or any of the powerful Democrats. You saw him kind of go after socialism, but it was calls for unity. It was let's all get along. Let's mostly applause lines that they could all agree on. This wasn't Trump wasn't coming out swinging here. People were predicting that he would declare a national emergency to start building his wall tonight. That certainly did not happen. I'll tell you that much. So there's a lot of questions people have, but in a way, you could almost read a little bit of weakness in Trump's tone tonight.
Yeah, it did certainly seem like he wasn't his usual self. I think that this shutdown is really hurting his political position.
Yeah, and that he needs that wall. I mean, that's the whole thing. If they're able to prevent him from getting that wall, then he lost. And that's the thing is that. And so, but then in order to get his wall, he's going to have to shut the government down again. I don't think the Democrats are just going to say, you know what, you got it this time. And then that raises the question, if Trump does not get his wall, or if Trump has to shut down the government again, I mean, this guy is starting to get a little bit desperate here. What's he doing here? Venezuela's a nice distraction. He can beat his chest and hate on the commies and hate the Reds and remind everyone of the good old days in Reagan. But on some level, I mean, I really sensed, that Trump wasn't as strong as he was during his first State of the Union address or even his previous one. I mean, this was coming from a much more kind of weak place, a much more offering an olive branch. Let's all get along, right? Let's not fight so much now. And the government's back on for a few more weeks, but, the shutdown could come once again very, very easily. And you have to wonder, what's going to happen with this administration. I also thought that the pandering on abortion was a little bit desperate.
Yeah, that was pretty bad.
Yeah, every phrase. I mean, it was like beforehand they handed him the pro-life 101 guidebook, and he said, okay, what do I say here? Late-term abortion. Rip the baby. It's like he went through and it was like they told him every single word to say. And, Mike Pence and all of them, they were cheering. They had big grins on their face because it's like he basically read a script they wrote for him. I mean, but again, you have to remember Trump used to be pro-choice when he was politically active here in New York, for a long time. Now he says, well, he's always been pro-life or, whatnot. But this is Trump is not an evangelical Christian. Right? I mean, we saw him at Liberty University, trying to quote a Bible verse, and instead of quoting 2 Corinthians, he quotes 2 Corinthians, right? Because he clearly is not familiar with the Bible at all, right? Trump's lifestyle and the reputation he has is not one of any Bible thumper, right? And that his alliance with religious conservatives like Mike Pence is a very tentative one. I mean, they don't approve of his lifestyle at all. So the desperate pandering to them as things get crazier. That's interesting as well, and you have to wonder what's going on with that.
Yeah, definitely.
But
I mean, it's politics.
It is. And then you have to wonder what's going on the Democratic side. CNN came out before the speech this afternoon basically condemning the fact that Bernie Sanders was planning to do a rebuttal, right? And saying, oh, Bernie Sanders should just accept the regular Democratic Party rebuttal. and basically attacking Bernie Sanders for doing this. And you see, both parties at this point are divided. You've got your neocon Republicans, and you've got your America First, Trump, isolationist Steve Bannon Republicans. You've got your, standard Nancy Pelosi, Hillary Clinton, Kamala Harris Democrats, and then you've got your Ocasio-Cortez, Bernie Sanders, economic populist, expand the welfare state Democrats, and there's some clear divisions. And then you got Tulsi Gabbard, who's running on a platform of non-interventionism and saying things that a lot of people like Rand Paul and stuff agree with on foreign policy, and that politics in the USA is getting quite crazy right now. Things are really getting shaken up. That things are not what they used to be. It's not clear, cut and dry. It's not like the standard Republicans versus Democrats, and they're all pretty much the same. Where things are getting messy. There are bigger disagreements in the ruling class than there have been in my lifetime, for sure. I mean, and this crisis is only escalating. And Trump can think there's an economic miracle going on here, but the reality is the spending power just isn't there. And that things have gotten pretty shaky on Wall Street over the last few months, especially in reaction to his trade and tariffs and whatnot. So, and I'm wondering what's going to happen over. I know you're up there in Canada. What's going to happen with the CEO? Right? I mean, they grabbed the CEO of this Chinese company. They're holding her. I mean, what's going to happen there? I mean, what do you think? China's just going to sit back and keep doing business with the USA if they execute, or they not execute, but if they extradite to the USA and end up prosecuting and imprisoning one of the most important financial officers in China, the head of the largest telecommunications manufacturer in the world? If the USA locks her in prison for life over technicalities about how she registered, I mean, I don't think China is just going to sit back and take that lightly. So a lot of questions remain here, and things are not all settled and all solved.
No, I think that in the end Canada's going to end up regretting doing the U.S.'s bidding in this situation with China. We don't have the economic clout in China that the United States does. We're not going to win this one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's got to be embarrassing for Canada because Canadians don't like Trump. I mean, the idea that their police forces and security forces and courts grabbed somebody so that Trump could, win a political point in a trade war. I mean, that's got to be embarrassing. I think even if people are just kind of your standard, nationalistic, patriotic Canadians, it's got to hurt their national pride on some level, right?
I think so. I think that the move has been generally has not been good for Trudeau at all, because essentially he's forced us to get into the middle of a fight that wasn't even ours.
Indeed. Well, you and me are just doing our thing, trying to spread the truth in a world of lies, right? And we certainly heard a whole, 2 hours of nauseating stuff now, but I guess we'll both recover in the next few days.
Yeah,
indeed.
Definitely.
All right, well, thanks for inviting me on here. I do appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
To chat with you. Yeah, we should do this again sometime soon.
Definitely.
I'll try to figure it out so we can do it on my channel too. That'd be fun. Right?
Okay.
Lives, good times. Thanks for having me on.
No problem. See ya.